Professor Lenka Bustikova, thank you very much for joining our interview series. Let me start right away with the first question. In light of Andrej Babiš's decisive electoral victory, how would you interpret the current realignment of Czech party politics? Does this signify a deeper structural shift towards sovereignist populism, or is it a contingent backlash against liberal governance?
Thank you for this wonderful and difficult question. I would say that I am not alarmed by the outcome of the Czech elections, but I'm certainly concerned. And I think what happened in this election, and many other have commented on it as well, is that you have a consolidation of two camps. I would call them liberal and illiberal, because I think that what the previous or outgoing government offered was not particularly liberal governance. So what happened in this election is that the Andrej Babiš and his party ANO very successfully and very skillfully consolidated voters who are unhappy, not doing well, insecure, and also revengeful. And he did very well. And I think the very good news about the elections is that in the previous election, about 1 million votes was wasted on smaller anti-system parties. In this election, it was only 400,000. And Babiš managed to consolidate sort of the coalition of unhappy people who wanted change. He did it well. And so that's, that camp consolidated, and that camp will now have voice, and there'll be an accountability mechanism. The liberal camp actually did quite well, just the electoral math didn't work as well for them as 4 years ago. And I also think that they were punished for not delivering on certain aspects. They could have delivered progressive policies that would not have cost them much, and they didn't do that, partly because of some tensions in the coalition. They could have been more proactive about LGBTQ rights, registered partnership, maybe rights of women, but most importantly, the voters, they got a tough hand. They inherited a country with high inflation, high debt. I think they did all they could, but it was not good enough. The macroeconomic statistics in the Czech Republic are quite favorable, but they are not able to sell the story, and they neglected a lot of economic issues that they should have paid more attention to housing crisis or some other issues. I also think that the outgoing coalition still represented sort of a 1990s approach to the economy, and allegiance to the era that most voters now question and want to see gone. So I would say it's more a consolidation of the illiberal camp and the reconsolidation of the liberal camp. And what we see, and I think we are seeing it in many countries, is that the illiberal camp is much stronger. And I think in the future, if these sort of types of consolidation occur, I think we see that it's very, very difficult to win elections on behalf of the liberal camp. It's a huge challenge in many other countries as well.
Right. Drawing on your concept of technocratic populism, how does Babiš's blend of managerialism and anti-elite rhetoric differ from classical populist radical right movements in Central Europe? Has this hybrid model evolved since his first premiership?
So when we wrote the article with Professor Petrova question, technocratic populism, we thought of it as an ideal type, and now every ideal type is then faced with reality and gets a little bit murky and dirty. So in the sort of original classification, technocratic populism in its pure form did not have an aspect of culture wars, of nativism, of sovereignism. It was a populist utilization of expertise to win elections. And so Babiš, who is, a very flexible and very savvy politician, certainly has evolved. And especially in the 2023 presidential elections, we have seen that he really turned up sort of the nativist appeal. It was quite remarkable. But then he softened up again. So in this current election, the party and Babiš toned it down. So we also see some shift from technocratic populism, and the sort of the managerial appeal is that when he ran first, he ran as a competent manager. Now I think he's running more as a big daddy that's going to take care of things and spend a lot of money on his constituents. So the party originally that he found was a party of fiscally conservative, running efficiently state as a firm. That's no longer a platform. The platform is now to redistribute, to spend a lot, which the party certainly will do, and to target, pockets of voters that are the party's constituency. So that it will have nothing to do with efficiency. Even though in his electoral appeal, obviously one of the appeals was that the previous coalition was not good at handling sort of economic problems well, and I think certainly that there is an element of truth to that. So in some way, this is an election about a huge part of this election were pocketbook concerns, poverty, and people who in regions that are remarkably poor. The Babiš and ANO managed to mobilize these voters very, very successfully and very effectively.
Right. Given Babiš membership in the Patriots for Europe and his critiques of the Green Deal, how do you assess the interplay between sovereigntist populism in Czechia and EU-level constraints? Are we witnessing a gradual erosion of the EU's leverage over domestic political agendas?
I think we certainly see that the European Union does not have instruments, or is not willing to use instruments at hand to deal with autocratic or illiberal leaders. Unfortunately, Babiš is a very pragmatic politician. He will criticize the Green Deal, but if, let's say, his agro-third firm can benefit for it, I'm sure he would be open to discussions. One important aspect of the discussions about the Green Deal is going to be the fact that it's very likely that the party that's called Motorists, it's very likely that the future coalition is going to have members of this party, and this party absolutely opposes Green Deal. There is a possibility that this party will get a portfolio of the environment, and so there will be certainly a very strong pushback against the Green Deal from the incoming coalition. So the coalition negotiations just started. It will take some time, but certainly there'll be a pushback. But also Babiš being very pragmatic, I can imagine that if he views, he will push against the Green Deal selectively as it sort of pleases his political agenda. He will probably have to please his coalition partners as well. But I'm sure he will be able to navigate this very skillfully, because there is a level of the Green Deal that's just rhetoric, and then there are technical aspects to it that are not going to be that easy to roll back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If Babiš succeeds in forming a minority government backed by SPD and motorists, how might this affect the strategic behavior of far-right actors? Does your research on illiberal alliances suggest a stable coalition or a volatile marriage of convenience?
So the negotiations just started, and so one possibility is going to be a coalition of ANO, led by Andrej Babiš, and motorists. And it's not clear whether the far-right party, SPD, Tomio Okamura's party, or 10+5 MPs, whether they will be in the government or whether they'll be in a silent, they will be silently supporting the coalition from the parliament. And it's possible that perhaps for the far right, the Babiš will ask them to nominate experts. It is going to be a volatile coalition, but Babiš has shown in the past that he can handle coalitions very well. So actually, I think anyone who is thinking about going into a coalition with Andrej Babiš should be very scared, because Andrej Babiš once upon a time was with a junior partner and then was in a coalition with Social Democrats, and he completely destroyed them and siphoned out all their voters. They are basically gone, and especially after this election, this is a dead party. So, and Babiš can be credited for that. And I actually think that the SPD should really think twice how to handle this future coalition relationship, because I think a lot of the result of the election has shown that Babiš can very skillfully siphon out far-right voters as well. So I think this is, you are going to deal with a very skillful politician who managed to basically cannibalize coalition partners. I think with motorists, there are going to be some tensions. It's not a stable party. It's built around a few personalities. The biggest tension in the coalition is going to be about, budget balance. The party of motorists run on, it's a, in a way, intellectual child of former President Václav Klaus. They would like to keep balanced budgets. That's absolutely unacceptable, and it has been already signaled that we can absolutely forget about that. So there might be a tension, but I can imagine that they will very, very quickly get over it. So Babiš is one of the most talented politicians in the Czech Republic now. So I expect he will handle this quite well, with some arm twisting and incentives, but I suspect he'll be very successful.
The SPD underperformed compared to expectations. How do you explain the resilience of Babiš's populist appeal despite the presence of established far-right actors? Does this reflect a mainstreaming of radical right discourse in Czech politics?
So Okamura his party underperformed. Moreover, he has a group of very undisciplined MPs, because in fact he had three other parties. It was the coalition. So he has 5 MPs that are sort of more like coalition MPs than SPD members. He is no longer an authentic politician. A lot of far-right voters actually don't, and from some other parties, no longer see him as a credible nativist fighter. That's one aspect. But also he is too extreme for the Czech context. So he ran a very vitriolic pro-Russian campaign. He also openly declared that he would like the Czech Republic to leave NATO and the European Union, and Czech voters absolutely do not have stomach for that. So he overshot, and so this is just too extreme. And also, as for example, Aleš Michal, a Czech political scientist, made I think, very insightful observation, in the sense that the mobilization against the far right that was done by the pro-democratic parties and the coalition together, when they warned Czech voters against parties that will steer the Czech Republic towards Russia, that it actually worked, and the anti-system and far-right voters or far-left voters run towards the umbrella of ANO, because so in a way it worked, but it did not help the coalition together. It helped Babiš, basically. And another sort of important thing to aspect is that during the presidential elections, which Babiš lost, but it was a polarized election, and in that election, Babiš managed to attract a lot of far-right voters, and in 2023, and these voters got used to the possibility of voting for him. So this is also, he lost the presidential election, but it helped him enormously in this election when he is an acceptable alternative for the far-right.
Mm-hmm. In your work on the revenge of the radical right, you emphasize how minority accommodation can trigger backlash. To what extent are current Czech political dynamics shaped by cultural issues like LGBTQ plus rights, immigration, Ukrainian refugees, rather than economic grievances?
So I thought about these issues quite a bit, because I do think with a lot of far-right mobilization today, the appeal of ethnic issues is a little bit subdued. I think the logic, and I also have one or two articles with Professor Petra Guasti when we speculate about this. The logic of the book is that backlash ensues after accommodation of minorities. It's a backlash against elevating groups and putting forward policies that help them out. And so in that way, the logic of backlash applies as well, because the Czech Republic, when you think about the status quo and pursuing policies that really were beneficial to Ukrainian refugees, you can think of an ensuing backlash. I mean, the Ukrainian refugees are no longer as warmly welcomed as they used to be. There have been also a lot of attempts to push forward a more aggressive legislation to protect women against rape and sexual assault, attempts to codify Istanbul Convention. So these are all policies that in a way shift the balance of power or shift the policy in a certain direction, and we have seen a backlash. Similarly, the LGBTQ community is hoping to increase their rights. And a lot of the public is quite open to this possibility. But but the process of getting there is that you shift the balance, you shift the policies, and so once that happens, and you see advocates, then naturally the advocates on the opposite side are also activated. So I do think the policy backlash logic can apply here as well.
Mm-hmm. Recent scholarship highlights the rise of confessional illiberalism across Central Europe. Do you see religiously inflected sovereigntism gaining ground in Czechia, or does the country's secular legacy limit the trajectory compared to Hungary and Poland?
So this is an excellent question. So this refers to a recent article that I wrote with Lotem Halevi. She's now the University of Constance. And one thing one has to keep in mind is that a lot of the mobilization on religious issues is a mobilization of political identity. So it is not necessarily the case that religiously infused countries will see a higher mobilization of religious identity, of sort of having religion activity as a political identity. So the Czechia is a very secular country, but we do see around issues of transgender or some LGBTQ issues being framed sort of very similar to Hungary and Poland. The culture wars are nowhere to be as fierce and as in the neighboring countries, but I think the country potentially can have its many cultural wars. One important thing to keep in mind is that in the Czech Republic, the Christian Democratic Party is firmly in a coalition and sort of belongs to the liberal camp or belongs to the pro-democratic coalition. And so as long as they are sort of on the side of parties that respect the rule of law, then that creates, I think, a sort of a wall or a firewall against politicization of some of these issues. But we have seen it even in a country as secular as the Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm. Your article in Europe's Closet discusses how minority rights can catalyze illiberal backlash. Are Czech populist and far-right actors increasingly weaponizing LGBTQ plus issues as part of their sovereignist narratives? How does this compare to developments in Slovakia or Poland?
So certainly these issues are, high on the agenda in Slovakia and Poland, even though we sort of see in Poland that some of the LGBTQ issues is not as salient as it used to be a few years ago. So, but we do see narratives about protecting children against transgenderism. So this is a rhetoric that comes into place. It's sometimes part of a anti-EU or Eurosceptic rhetoric, telling people what to do, how to raise their children, progressive agenda around women, destruction of traditional families through gender rights. So, the offshoots are there. It's not a particularly dominant strain. I do think that the pocketbook issues greatly dominated this election. So the potential is there, but it's underutilized. And I think the Catholic Church also in the Czech Republic is quite restrained and really does not enter into these debates in a way it does in Slovakia or in Poland.
Right. In your co-authored work on patronage, trust, and state capacity, you argue that low bureaucratic trust fosters clientelism. How does this dynamic manifest in Babiš's political strategy, especially considering his corporate background and patronage networks?
So Andrej Babiš cares about one thing only, and that's his firm Agrofert, and his political party is his firm. The party. This is not a regular party. This is a business project and a business offshoot. So he has a huge conflict of interest, which nobody knows how he's going to solve if he's nominated as a prime minister, because the Czech Republic doesn't have an institute of blind trust. So he will be always, the conflict of interest will always be there, because his firm Agrofert is a large recipient of state subsidies. So that's not necessarily patronage networks. That's in a way making sure that the state is in a fantastic synergistic position with his firm. So that is a particularity of his business background and the setup of the party, that is a vehicle for him to keep political power and be able to use state subsidies and EU subsidies, and the conflict interest is just written all over him. I would not, in terms of ANO as a party strategy, I would not necessarily define it as clientelism. I think what we see when Babiš was in power, I would sort of more call it as a targeted distribution, as targeting pockets of voters that many of them actually do need this targeting, and it's very beneficial to them. So picking up groups or dissecting groups that will be selected for state help, and the budget deficit is going to balloon. So I don't think that's necessarily patronage, but it's a targeted exchange that actually a lot of parties do, and I think it's bread and butter politics. But having said that, aside from the targeted redistribution, Babiš will make sure that his agglomerate benefits from him being a prime minister again, which is a very likely scenario as it seems now.
Right. Do you think Babiš's economic promises, higher pensions, lower taxes, welfare expansion, should be understood as clientelistic appeals rooted in weak state capacity, or as programmatic populism aimed at reshaping public expectations?
I would, if I were to choose, I would really use the more of a frame of programmatic populism or targeted redistribution. We have seen it between 2017 2021. I think what's happening in the region now is that expectations of voters have changed, and that goes for Poland and Slovakia as well, that voters of populists now expect redistribution and higher spending. And I think what's going to happen if he stays in power for 4 years is that these expectations will become absolutely entrenched. There is a recent book on Poland by Ben Stanley and Stanley Ben that talk about this lock-in of basically transformation of the Polish party system in a way that now all voters expect that the next party in power is going to spend, no matter who is that going to be. And I think if the current governing coalition will ever come back, they will have to do the same thing. They will not be able to promise balanced budgets. They will, if they want to defeat Babiš 4 years from now, they will also have to promise spending. Good luck with the budgets. But I think there is a general entrenchment of voters expecting that the states need to really open up the valves with probably pretty bad long-term consequences. But nobody's thinking long-term these days.
Right. Given Babiš's emphasis on managerial competence, how does technocratic rhetoric interact with populist radical right sovereignist claims in his current coalition building efforts?
So it's going to be a big spending spree, and the motorists will have to hold their noses. The far right really doesn't care, actually, supports spending as long as it's spending on Czechs or sort of native spending and not spending on Ukrainians or migrants. And I think it's going to be a move from manager to, in a way, patronal figure who is going to take care of everybody, including, making appointments for colonoscopy. And it's a part of the big appeal of Babiš was sort of emphasis on improving the healthcare system, which if the coalition does, having sort of been quite critical about ANO, I do have to emphasize that it's quite possible that some of the portfolios that the coalition will control can be given to very competent people in the previous government. ANO had some ministers or portfolios that were run quite well. So, for example, the Ministry of Education underwent some really good changes. It's also possible that some of the infrastructure projects that started and they need to be completed, or huge shortage of housing stock, if Babiš can really deliver on these issues, that's going to be very successful, rewarded, and would benefit the country quite a bit. So if he throws in managerial competence and delivers, that would be fantastic. And I think it's possible that there might be some policy changes that can be, that there's a possibility that maybe they will be done well and in the long-term benefit. But I sort of suspect a big spending spree and a very short-term horizon given Babiš's age. So
right,
we'll see. Yeah.
Right. Analysts have warned that Babiš could align Czechia with Hungary and Slovakia, forming a sovereignist bloc inside the EU. Do you view this as a tactical positioning or a substantive ideological shift toward illiberal governance?
So I'm very concerned. I think despite the relatively moderate appeal, I do think that certainly Babiš's victory is a big win for illiberals in the region. I do not think for Czech democracy this is going to be a bloodbath, but I do think there is going to be a lot of bleeding. I think the patient will survive, but that there is going to be a strong shift. Babiš is also, very strategic. If he and his coalition partners will drag him to some extreme positions. Maybe the Czech public will become accustomed to that. This is the first time, again, if this coalition emerges, this is going to be the first time in Czech history where the far right is either in coalition or silently supporting the government. That's a huge breakthrough. So this is very concerning. The motorists are, it's not an extreme party, but certainly a party that is not rooting for the European rule of law and some liberal democratic values. So certainly this is very concerning, and it's a big win for illiberalism in Europe. Babiš's victory is a big win for illiberalism, for sure.
Right. Well, what are the potential institutional guardrails against democratic backsliding in Czechia, and how do they compare to Hungary and Slovakia during their own illiberal turns?
There are a lot of guardrails. So the most important actor is the current president, Petr Pavel. So certainly he can veto, he can play a huge informal role. He will have to think very hard whether the future prime minister is going to violate the law by being in a position of a conflict of interest. And I really this is going to be a hard puzzle to solve. So the Czech president is a pro-democratic, centrist president with good temperament and very high levels of popularity. The second guardrail is the second chamber, which Slovakia does not have, and so the Czech Senate is still dominated by so-called liberal parties or pro-democratic parties. There are a lot of roadblocks. Another institution that's quite important is the Constitutional Court that has saved Czech democracy many times. That's also important. Media in the Czech Republic were independent. Babiš is going to go after the Czech television and Czech radio, but Czech Republic has a robust, quite pluralistic media scene. It might change, but that's also quite important guardrail. And then Czech civil society is quite active, even though one has to be very careful about what mobilization means. Because, for example, work by Guasti and Aleš Michal showed that actually populists are sometimes much better at mobilizing. And this election has shown it, that people can be mobilized for and against democracy or for liberal or illiberal causes. And so this time in this election mobilized the illiberals more, but there were other elections in the past when the pro-democratic camp was mobilized quite a. So the civil society is active, it pays attention. So there is hope, but I do expect that the quality of Czech democracy will decline during this period because of disrespect for the rule of law. Babiš, does not like rule of law, and his coalition partners are either extremists or at the fringe of the mainstream, certainly. Another thing I would like to mention is that one of the leaders of the Motorist Party is a person who has accusations of domestic abuse filed against him, and in terms of signaling the moral integrity of political leaders, this also doesn't bode well for just appointing people with questionable moral standing to very high positions of power.
And finally, Professor Bustikova, situating Czechia within the broader Central European context, do you see the current developments as part of a cyclical populist wave or a deeper structural illiberal swerve, as discussed in the liberal turn or swerve in Central Europe?
So at this moment, I expect that this is going to be a 4-year swerve, but I don't know what's going to happen at the end of these 4 years. Because what we see in other countries is that when the 2.0 comes back, when populists come back to power, they are much more effective. They know what to do. They have their playbooks ready. They have done this before. They're much more revengeful, aggressive, and they know how to get things done. So I expect that Babiš will weaken the rule of law, that he will definitely try to weaken some of the guardrails. I do think that the coalition partners will certainly drag the country more towards the east and towards the west. So the real question is going to be, after 4 years, is there anyone going to be there able to beat them? And I think it's going to be very, very difficult, because this consolidation of these camps shows that the illiberal camp is just numerically much stronger. So either they'll have to make some terrible, terrible mistakes, which they will, and the voters will maybe forgive them, maybe not, or the liberal camp will have to grow. And we see in other countries that it is a very steep hill to climb. So swerve for now, but I am very concerned about the future.
Professor Lenka Bustikova, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.